Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Adult Faith Formation session. My name is Stephanie Williams, and I am a member of the Adult Faith Formation team. Today, we continue our series on what does happiness mean for people of faith. And I'm delighted to introduce to you Reverend Peter Marty. Peter will speak with us today about living a life that means something. If you haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting Peter, let me just tell you a little bit about him. He's a retired Lutheran pastor, and he spent nearly 4 decades in parish ministry. Since 2016, he served as the editor and publisher of The Christian Century, a journal devoted to shaping America's conversation about religion and faith in public life. Peter and his wife, Susan, moved to Denver from Davenport, Iowa, and they moved here to be near their 2 children and their 4 grandchildren. Peter and Susan became members of Montview a little over a year ago, and as we've been working with Peter to prepare for this session, he mentioned that he loves being a part of a Christian community in action as he sees here at Montview. So this morning, Peter will help us reflect on how we can size up happiness in light of the Christian journey in our own faith lives. So please join me in welcoming Peter Marty.
Thank you, Stephanie, very much. It is a joy to be in this particular community. Susan and I are getting to know numbers of you, and I just think congregations are one of the great organisms in American culture. There's just nothing like it, you know? A lot of places you pay dues and you get benefits. If you pay dues at the Y, you can swim, and at the country club, you can tee off. But at church, you don't pay dues. You just live generously, and you take as much as you receive, and it's all good. As I passed the baseball diamonds this morning, just packed with families and kids, I often think what they're missing, and the beauty of the way we shape our lives around and from and by each other. So as Stephanie mentioned, I love parish ministry and the church. These years I'm very devoted. In fact, I'll put up a slide here. A lot of people don't know what the Christian Century magazine is. It's a monthly. It's been around since 1900. It used to be a weekly. We were the first magazine in America to publish Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. We were active in the women's suffrage movement before it ever took public flight, and many other interesting pieces of our history are part of the magazine's legacy. And I commute to Chicago about every 6 weeks, but also if I'm not here, it's usually there's something else on the docket. Speaking at other churches, either in this community or next week it's preaching in Richmond, Virginia. But anytime we can be at Montview, Susan and I love to come right here. So I want to start with happiness, but try to move you to a different place. So before you leave, I won't be saying happiness so much as some other ideas, concepts, words, thoughts about the Christian life. I think faith, the Christian faith specifically, allows for some grander possibilities than happiness. And not to shortchange happiness, because I don't want to be a sad person, but I think there's more depth, and I want to go after that. And as I was saying to Stephanie and company up here, when you have a series like this and the presenters don't meet, it's kind of fun and fascinating to see where there's overlap and conflict and contradiction, and you might hear all of that this morning. So let me begin by talking about what has for more than a generation shaped young people in this dear country of ours. It's, of course, the Happy Meal. For some families, it's the only place kids want to go. It's the only food they'll eat, and thankfully McDonald's is up in their nutrition value of the Happy Meal as I understand it. But basically it's a combo of food and, as you all know, a little prize. Actually, it's not really a prize, though. It's just this cheap plastic thing, like a a Spider-Man ring that's made out of plastic or something. And basically, there's no talking a kid out of it. They see this box, and there's chicken nuggets, and then there's this plastic thing, and then what you're really buying is happiness, or that's at least the way McDonald's thinks of it. If you try to talk a child out of it, who's pleading desperately, good luck if you're a parent. And that little trinket makes them happy for about 1 minute and 30 seconds, and then it ends up on the floor of the SUV for the next year, it seems to me. But you know as well as I do that the contentment over the Happy Meal, it just simply doesn't last. You don't find somebody getting married and saying, you know, Dad, thank you so much for building a life of contentment with me. I'll never forget the Happy Meals that made my life possible, or something like this. The only one whose happiness endures is the McDonald's Corporation, as people keep on buying these silly little things. The truth is, though, I want to say, as we grow older, we don't get any smarter. Our Happy Meals just get a little more expensive. And we find other things that sort of temporarily bring contentment. Because we know the world keeps trying to convince us that happiness is just one Happy Meal away. Maybe you heard the story of the monk. If you did, just wince when you hear it again. But this monk at this monastery was a place where it was quiet. You weren't supposed to speak. In fact, the only words you were allowed to speak were 2 words every 5 years. And so here's this new monk, and he comes and he has to seal his mouth shut. And after 5 years, he utters 2 words: food, cold. He goes back to his gardening and all the other things that these monks did in solitary work without speaking, and 5 years later, he gets 2 more words: bed, hard. More years pass. On his 15th anniversary of being in the monastery, he gets to speak again. This time he says, I quit. And the abbot says, I'm not surprised. You've been complaining ever since you got here. Well, the history, this is really quick. And if those of you that were here a couple weeks ago heard it much more elaborate, but let me take 2 minutes to basically walk through what I think is kind of my sense, at least, of the history of happiness, or happiness. Yeah, happiness. Well, in Aristotle's time, it consisted as, what was the name of our first presenter? Hernandez, yes. He talked about, for Aristotle, happiness was constituted by the good life, the virtues of our human existence. Eudaimonia, he kept saying, this concept of flourishing with the goodness of life. Epicureans, they connected happiness with pleasure, and the good life for them was whatever brings us pleasure. Stoics, they didn't elevate pleasure so much. They just argued that a person had the capacity to be happy no matter how daunting or how painful their circumstances might be. Christianity, through the Middle Ages, it kind of shunned the whole idea of pleasure. If any of you come out of traditions where there was no dancing and no card playing and all these other odd things, that's from the Middle Ages, actually. You can't be too happy as a Christian. They shunned the pleasures, regarding pain as a more useful path. The Renaissance, it happened to bring, happiness from heaven back down to earth, and you can see this flourishing in Europe if you study Renaissance history. The Enlightenment came along, and during the Enlightenment, happiness became a right, something you pursue, something you might be able to attain. As we all know, the Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence, it moved from a pursuit to actually a right. It's an inalienable human right to be happy. Well, today in the Western world, the message of happiness is kind of contrary to the message of Christianity. Christianity is about losing yourself. It's about abandoning yourself for the sake of this union with Christ. But if you listen to your average commencement speech at a college or university, it has a lot to do with beating your own drum and following your own path and taking your own wisdom and running with it and following your dream and pursuing union with ourselves and needing to express our deepest and truest inner selves, getting in touch with those feelings. That's kind of the Western world in a nutshell today as we think about happiness. Well, I think one of the problems with this whole study of happiness, if I can just put it on the table, is that all the research is heavily reliant on people's impression of what constitutes happiness for them, which makes it, of course, very subjective. We make our pleasures best as we can. We design our circumstances where we can, and we get frustrated when we can't control something. But it's a subjective enterprise. And so here's the problem. Happiness, more than anything else, is a feeling. And plain and simple, it just is. Are you feeling happy or not? I don't think it's really the bottom line for us. It can't be, actually. It cannot be the measure of your life. It can't be the measure of mine. Let me give you an example. And this is from a Yale professor, Mr. Shelley Kagan. And he has us imagine this little scenario, if you will. Imagine that an art historian, he writes, who has discovered certain overlooked paintings or the painter's diaries that revolutionize our interpretation of that famous painter's work and that famous painter's place in history. Well, the professor has discovered these overlooked things. The professor also seems to have a family who loves him. He has an adoring spouse, kids who really admire him, love and respect him. He dies a happy man. Kagan then says, but after his death, it's discovered that the paintings and the diaries on which he based his discoveries were unknown to this professor, forgeries. And it's revealed that his wife was cheating on him, his kids really wanted his money more than anything else, and his academic peers despised him. So the question becomes, did this person die happy? Or better said, what if this were your life? Would that be okay with you? I think when we think about situations like this, it reminds me that happiness isn't all that it's always cracked up to be. The deceived professor, what he really wanted was accomplishment, love, respect, these wonderful attributes, but he had none of them. And so I think this little thought experiment of Professor Kagan teaches us that what's genuinely bottom line, most valuable in our lives, is not happiness. It is other things. Happiness is man-made, person-made. A happy home, a happy friendship, happiness on the job. If we're lucky and we're diligent in the way we operate, we can often achieve a certain kind of happiness. But happiness is heavily dependent on our circumstances. If you get a diagnosis of stage 4 or something or other this afternoon, it's likely to affect your happiness index in some way. And to this extent, I think happiness is a kind of deceptive word. Because we have fortunes, all of us do, and we have misfortunes. And I say happiness is kind of a deceptive word because it feels like either it should be a right, think Thomas Jefferson, or it should be the goal of life. How can you become happy? I'm not at all convinced that either of one of those things is worth our time. Happiness comes from the root word hap, which means luck, which means chance, which means fortune. We hap upon things. We encounter what comes our way. By definition, you might say, happiness is a chancy proposition. It may enjoy long stretches of time in your life, but you can't will happiness, and you can't sustain it either. Nobody can sustain happiness permanently. So this is why I want to talk about something deeper. I want to talk about the meaning of life and the joy of life and the blessing that we know as Christian people. Philippians 4, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, says the Apostle Paul, I say rejoice. Goes on to other lovely things about pray without ceasing, always giving thanks, and then you'll have the peace of the Lord in you no matter what. It's a great four-step tool to having peace in your heart. But he begins with rejoice in the Lord. Again, I say always rejoice. He's not talking about happiness. He's talking about this all-encompassing disposition that you get to enjoy and I get to enjoy, and it's called joy. Yeah. The Bible nowhere speaks about a happy Christian. You won't find it. You just keep paging, you won't find it. Happiness depends on what happens. That word hap, it depends upon circumstances for us. Joy is never touched by your circumstances. It's not touched by external conditions. You don't achieve joy. It's just a quality that enters your life and that enters my life, kind of like a gift. Happiness, we might say, often reaches for something so that we can wrap our fingers around it. That little plastic trinket in the Happy Meal box, or that phenomenal glass of wine in this really delicate wine goblet, or this resort experience, or whatever. Our hands kind of just love that. This is mine. That little Spider-Man ring, that's mine. Joy approaches life, though, I want to say, with open hands. It's more inclined to say, this is yours. Because joy, rather than resting in something, rests in someone. Rejoice in the Lord always, says the Apostle Paul. That's our someone, the one in whose image we believe we are created. We make our pleasures as best as we can, but I think God gives us our joys. Think of Jesus eating his last meal. I mean, hours away from his death. It's not a happy moment, and his disciples around him aren't happy about the occasion either. In no sense would we be able to say that the Last Supper is happiness. He couldn't offer it to his friends any more than we would expect him to. But it's at that meal where Jesus says, in the dire straits of that moment, just prior to the crucifixion, these things I have spoken to you. He says that evening around candlelight, that my joy may be in you. Which I think is what causes Frederick Buechner to say, God's joy is in our blood. That's why I use the word disposition. It's part of us. It's our home. God created us in joy, and God created us for joy. Happiness, it comes when things are going our way. Joy comes not because something is happening. Joy comes because we're alive. Here's another way to put it. Happiness is what you feel. These are just my words, so don't chalk these up to Aristotle or somebody brilliant. But happiness is what you feel when you have everything you could want in a day, whether it's on a trip or in some kind of awesome experience or through a friendship. But joy is what we feel when we discover we already have what we most need. Want versus need. The great theologian Paul Tillich, oops, I missed one here, hold on. Where's Tillich? I got him mixed up, here he is. He kind of piggybacked on this idea. He believed that the most fundamental human project is we have to come to terms that we are accepted by God. This is the story of grace. This is what we are trying so hard to learn, whether it's through parenting or through tough times or through being confronted with challenge. It's to believe that we are accepted. And Tillich said, simply accept the fact that you're accepted. When God gives acceptance, that is grace. But when we receive it and accept it, said Tillich, that is joy. Back to Eugene Peterson. I think, as I was saying, you know, we make our pleasures as best as we can, but God gives us our joys. And this line from Eugene is so beautiful. Joy, he says, it's not a requirement of the Christian life. It's more like a consequence. It's not what we have to acquire in order to experience life in Christ. It's what comes to us when we are walking in the way of faith. So, you know, if God gives us our joys, I think the recipe for landing this joy in your life and in mine, it's in the scriptures. It's the most succinct place, I think, is 1 John 4. We love because God first loved us, or Christ first loved us. But I want you to see the difference, if you can, between the gift of joy and either the manufacturing or the pursuit or the achievement or the desire for happiness, which is endless. Jesus' life, by the way, is bookended, not by happiness, but by joy. It was the angel who spoke to Mary, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy. Unto you will be born this." At his death, the resurrection, the women leave the tomb and we're told they had joy mixed with fear. He ascends up into heaven in that mysterious up and away cloud story, and his followers departed with joy. So his life is bracketed by joy. Now, joy is not the opposite of sorrow or suffering. I think it offers perspective on sorrow. I think joy offers some endurance through suffering. The Psalms, if you read the Psalms in depth, they are just laden with this commingling of joy and sorrow. They're not mutually exclusive. You can still have joy in your heart even when you're sad. My father died this past spring at 97, and he led the just most lovely life and just such happiness. And people would come to me and wonder how I was grieving. And I said, you know, I miss my dad. We had a great emotional connection. He was a lovely human being. But we just have such profound joy for his own joy for life. He just died an optimist. He loved to say yes to anything and anybody, including the father of Stephanie Williams, who was one of his advisees, I guess. And you've been in my house in Riverside, Illinois, 50 years ago. But he just loved people. And we know life doesn't go on forever. And I'm not being facetious here. I have just a particular joy that he lived by faith and he died by faith. And it's really profound. I have some sadnesses when I think about episodes that won't happen anymore and the conversations that I just cherish. But the sorrow doesn't overwhelm the joy. They're kind of beautifully co-mingled. Wendell Berry, be joyful, even though you've considered all the facts. This is what I'm talking about with respect to this sorrow piece or this suffering piece. So let me shift to another direction. A sadness for me these years is that Peanuts has pretty much disappeared from the comics page. And a kid would say, what's the comics page? In addition to what is Peanuts. But my lament has to do with Snoopy specifically. He's just disappearing from the American psyche, pure and simple. But to me, Snoopy is the epitome of exuberance in the context of all these problems in our world. He's trapped in a family that's not of his own choosing. Not that any dog can choose their family. But he refuses to lead a dull and miserable life. You know this after reading just 10 strips. Instead, he finds a way to delight in all circumstances, even painful ones. His doghouse, as you may know if you've seen a lot of Peanuts, it has a pool table inside, it has a television inside. There's a painting even by Vincent van Gogh. He leads a really rich life, but it's not rich with possessions. He paddles a canoe in a bird bath. He skates better than Wayne Gretzky. And he loves chocolate chip cookies. I think we can learn from the character of Snoopy's joy because it has this contagious quality about it. This deep down capacity to delight, even when, by all right and reason, pain and hardship should be driving that delight right into the ground. You know, we could ask in this world that's so full of tragedy and heartache and war and devastation, if joy is even appropriate for a sensitive Christian, a thoughtful Christian. How can there be joy inside of me if there's children starving in Gaza? How can there be? Well, the biblical test of joy's integrity is whether or not it's compatible with the raw nerve endings of pain. Time and again, we discover that only the heart that hurts has a right to joy. Some of the greatest praise that has ever stirred the imagination of believers has arisen from their darkest times. And I'm looking at you without knowing all of your lives, and I know this is true. People of faith, they learn to rejoice in God's presence even when there's little evidence to support it. It takes practice. It requires this very steady disposition. It even helps to have an example now and again of someone who's hardwired for joy. And for me, that's Snoopy, one of my heroes. There's a dumb little slide here, but I thought I'd just throw it up. It's about my big toe. My big toe is an honest man, the guy says, looking at his toe. So down to earth and normal, always true unto himself and pleasantly informal, full of simple energy, contented with his role. If all of me were more like him, I'd be a happy soul. Stupid, actually. But it's a good segue into something more meaningful, which I want to talk about. This whole notion of how to live a life of meaning that I think you're probably catching the drift of, I don't think can be built on happiness alone. Rabbi Harold Kushner has some really beautiful words about meaning in life, and this is what he says. If you know why bad things happen to good people made him famous, but he's famous for many other things than that book. He died 4 or 5 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and a pretty profound human being. But he said this one time: I believe that it is not dying that people are afraid of. Something else. Something more unsettling and more tragic than dying frightens us. We are afraid, he says, of never having lived, of coming to the end of our days with the sense that we were never really alive, that we never figured out quite what life was for. And he goes on to say, the pursuit of happiness is the wrong goal. You don't become happy by pursuing happiness. You become happy by living a life that means something. So if you lack some meaning or purpose in your life, or I lack some meaning and purpose in mine, it's going to affect both our capacity to recognize joy and our ability to enjoy happiness. It just is. All of our pleasures in life derive their pleasurableness from some kind of structure of meaning. Let me give you an example. Drinking a fine French wine from a beautiful glass along the banks of the Rhine River with some really good friends as the sun is setting, I haven't had this experience, but I can picture it, is a lovely thing. And in fact, it's very different than if you were to have a glass of wine by yourself in a styrofoam cup at your home or apartment because there's nothing good on TV that night. These are two totally different experiences, yet with the same elements. This is what I mean, that our pleasures derive a lot of their pleasurableness from these structures of meaning that are woven into our lives. Now, I'm going to wrap up quickly here because I want to move to questions. But, what's this one? Sally, will you make me the happiest man in the world and accept full responsibility if I should fail to be the happiest man in the world? I can't tell you how many couples I counseled over the years with this. As if that's the job description of a spouse. But to recap, Jesus does not say anything about happiness. He doesn't ask us to pursue it. He doesn't suggest it's a goal in life. I'm not trying to say that happiness is a bad thing. There are plenty of worse things to pursue in life. In fact, there's something commendable about people who have well-ordered lives that are disciplined and that are also carefree and that have a lot of happiness. It's a good thing, happiness is. It's just not the best thing. Because it presents to us as an end in itself, to be pursued for its own sake, as if the purpose of life is to be happy. But I want to say there's something else. Blessedness. Fundamentally different. Blessedness, it's a word saturated in Scripture, but it is given to us. Think of it as a sister to joy, if you will. We don't seek it. It's not our purpose in life, but in pursuing our purpose, in pursuing meaning in your life, we discover blessing. Even a life of deprivation can be a blessing. So happiness comes when you're in this really sweet spot with yourself and with the world. You get a new kitchen counter. You love the color of it. You spent time selecting it. It makes you happy. You go on this vacation. Everything worked out. Everything came together. The arrival, the departure times, the reservations, the Uber showed up. It was just fantastic. Guess what? You're happy. But happiness is an end in itself. Blessing is better. This, what I'm calling a sister to joy. Blessing is when you're in a really sweet spot with God, and your trust in the Lord is profound. You don't seek this blessing; it's just given to you. It's like grace. This North Dakota couple vacationing in the South one time, and they're eating at a Waffle House, and they order up pancakes, and the pancakes arrive, and there's this little white pile of stuff next to the pancakes, and the guy says, "What's this?" And the waiter says, they're grits. And he says, "I didn't order any grits." No, he says, "You don't order grits. Grits just comes." It does in the South. It just comes. That's grace. That's blessing. It just comes. It can be present even when our circumstances are not ideal or may in fact be lousy. The world, let me close here for questions. The world, as you and I may know it, is divided into two kinds of people. People who divide the world into two kinds of people, and those who don't. I'm the former on this particular issue. Here we go. You may know the image of radiators and drains. Radiators are people that you like to be around. You want to be around them. You love to be around them. They give off a warmth, light, life. If you haven't met my wife, Susan, I married her for her radiance. She gives off warmth and light and life. Drains, they take everything you have and then some. They give little or nothing back. Now, it might be unchristian for me to characterize our friends in this way, but we all have friends who take from us and who give little in return. It could be because they just talk constantly and there's never even any breathing space or oxygen in the room for anything else or something else altogether. And we have other friends from whom we receive warmth and cheer and things like comfort. As Christian people, our joy is supposed to radiate from within. Let your light so shine before others that they might see what you're up to in this world. Yeah. That's a way of saying joy is to be seen, it's to be shared, it's to be celebrated, it's to be danced. I don't think the church needs believers who believe. I think the church needs believers who rejoice. And I'm just getting acquainted with Presbyterianism since I'm a Lutheran. But let me close with this line from the Westminster Confession, which is that dreary charter of Presbyterianism. But the opening line of it is, the chief duty of man or woman is to love God and enjoy God forever. You put that on your refrigerator and live a joyous life this week. Thank you very much. Let's do some questions or comments if you're open or rattled or inspired or want to challenge something. Please. And I'll talk more if there are none. You know, I'll just talk.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your integration of some deep things that I've, thought and known for many years, coming from primarily a Reformed tradition. But anyway, I think you've helped or reminded me of something that I usually try to decide about whether something is true, is if it crosses cultures and circumstances. And so sometimes our teachings, at least in the wellness field, really do depend on just the fact that I'm a privileged white person living in America. It's like, can what I'm saying is true for me, my happiness level and my satisfaction level, does that translate to someone in Gaza or in a concentration camp? Or, how do they get to happiness and joy? And so I feel like what you've done really helps pull that together and talk about how it is possible.
Thanks for that. I do, what you're reminding us of is to, honestly, it's to contemplate the power of joy and blessing in our lives, and for goodness sakes, forget the circumstances more often. Viktor Frankl, in his book, The Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about it being in the concentration camps, and someone gives away their last piece of bread to someone else. If you go to the Boston Holocaust Museum, which is on Boston, right outside Faneuil Hall, it's stunning. They're glass chimneys, and names are etched all over them of Jews killed, and quotes from famous Jews who left words behind. One of them is from a woman named Gerda Weissman, and she talks about someone in the concentration camp had this raspberry that they put inside of a leaf, and they kept it in their pocket all day long. And at the end of the day, they gave away this raspberry. I think what we have to look at is not just some cheerfulness about our good health, which I'm so grateful when we have good health, but it's being able to recognize that we might be slammed by a cement truck in 4 hours and have a very different future. Beginning in the hospital. And what's going to happen to us? Are you suddenly going to change your disposition? It's like a pastor on our staff at my last church. She came out as a gay person, married another woman, and we had a big church, about double the size of Montview, but we lost 2-3 couples or families from it. And I brought each one of them into my office, and I said to them, now wait a minute. You loved Katie 3 weeks ago before you knew anything about this. Now suddenly you've flipped and you've decided she's not worth your time. Her ministry is somehow less valid. You don't have a relationship, a friendship. I said, this is crazy. A little change in your circumstances and you flip your whole life around and you leave this beloved community. I think we got to be careful with that, even when our own lives are stricken with, hardship. It's the easiest thing to do, but hope tells us to live a different way. And the Lord settles in a particular kind of way into our hearts, and we can know this peace. It's so profound, no matter what. And that's the way I want to try to live instead of just bouncing along the highs, which are lovely. I don't want to get rid of them. But a deep person is one who knows God through suffering and strengthens through adversity.
This last week, Mike, please. Running through my mind of what do the 3 words simplicity, humility, and hospitality have in mind? And it come down to the word grace. And what is grace other than what you're talking about?
Yeah, simplicity, humility, and what was the third one? Hospitality. Yeah, simplicity, humility, hospitality. Well, those are good things to live by. Whenever a dictionary of theological terms is produced, you're guaranteed to find sin, redemption, sanctification, all these lovely words. And I often think, well, where's humility? And where's hospitality? And where's availability? I think that's a theological word. When you make yourself available to somebody else, because you're giving of your time to be present for someone, that's a rich faith. Jesus, consistently, he drew near to them. He drew near to the people. He made himself available, even when he was exhausted. So I love the concept that we introduce new words into the theological lexicon, if you will, besides just this Bible stuff that's specifically in specific passages. Others?
Thank you so much. This presentation kind of reminded me of what's become popular in kind of secular culture, this kind of gratitude practice. And it's been framed to me to counter our kind of biological threat detection tendencies. And I'm curious what practices you like or have seen to encourage joy as you've described.
Thank you. If I caught the first part of your question correctly about practices and gratitude, I do read stuff about creating a gratitude calendar and posting something every day you're thankful for that can go in the fridge or in your diary. And I think all that's constructive. But I think what we're building towards through exercises like that is simply to make gratitude a way of life. So that every single time you're in front of a store clerk, you just say thank you. And every time you walk by a housekeeper in the hallway of a hotel, you just say thanks for cleaning around here. And every time you're on and on. So it's just part of who you are. You just exude gratitude. I just think that's the greatest tool to know joy. I don't know if there's a finer emotion in the human repertoire than gratitude. I mean, it's better than the Cubs winning the World Series. It's better than sex. It's better than the best classical music. It is simply profound to be a really and truly grateful person. Now, we tell our kids when they're little, we say, please and thank you, and it feels so robotic. But what we're trying to do is inculcate a manner of approaching the world and every human being you're ever going to meet, and to do so with a heart of gratitude. And you know as well as I do, when you meet someone like that, you want to spend more time with them. They're just precious. I think gratitude's the greatest way to build joy, a recognition of joy. Others, anybody? We have 4 minutes. I can offer something if you want as a close.
One of my favorite quotes is, "Contentment is the realization of that which you already have."
Contentment is the what of what you already have?
Realization.
The realization.
Of that which you already have.
Yeah. You know, Frederick Douglass, when he was abused by his master didn't want him to read and become literate, because if he did, he might become discontented. That was the master's notion, that here he's dutifully clipping the cotton, but if he could read, he might become discontented with what he's doing. And so he tried to keep books away from Frederick Douglass. When Frederick Douglass's master, a guy by the name of Mr. Auld, A-U-L-D, when he was dying, Douglass went to visit him in the hospital. And they both cried. Because by this point in his life, Douglass could read. He was illiterate. He wasn't discontented. He was enlightened. And he had the gift of enough joy in his life, if I can say that, to be able to visit the very one who enslaved him and to cry together. So, yeah, contentment is beautiful, and it helps us realize things. But when we're not able to know contentment, that's why we believe, that's why we trust, that's why we pray. We're trying to become contented with circumstances that we didn't ask for. So many of our circumstances are lousy, and we wish we didn't have them. But we pray for strength through them. There's that great passage also in Philippians 4, I can do all things through God who strengthens me. Well, that's not literally what it says. I can be strengthened in all occasions or through all occasions by the God who empowers me. It doesn't say I can do anything. I can garner strength through every circumstance, through the Lord who blesses me. And that's the life you and I want to lead, that we can somehow discover that strength, that joy, and give thanks through all circumstances, plenty or want, says the Apostle Paul. It doesn't matter. And if we're only going to shape our gratitude on when we've got everything, some families only pray at Thanksgiving because the table is so full it's dropping on the floor. But if you're only going to pray when you have plenty, what does it say about when you have want? What about giving thanks in all circumstances, says Paul? And you'll discover when you do that God gives you this marvelous peace, this empowering strength, this inner soul. It's just unmatched. And it's why you and I are Christian, or trying to be the best Christians we can be. Thanks, everybody, so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for taking time today and sharing your thoughts with us about not just happiness, but joy and meaningfulness. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. All of you on this journey of life. We'll get acquainted. Thank you.